Good morning. It's great to be with you this morning. I'm glad we can be here. I love that song, man. When he speaks and he moves, things change. Isn't that good? Isn't it good that that just isn't history, it's reality? That's great stuff. I'm so grateful for it. You know, when I take a drink of coffee, sometimes I'm worried I'm going to dip this thing. It should terrify all of us. The Chronicles of an ADD Communicator. Here they are. You know, doubt is really such a huge part of life, isn't it? How many of you have some doubts today? How many of you have some doubts in your faith? How many of you have some doubts in your journey? See, what we have in common a lot of times is our humanity, and in that humanity, it's our doubts. I'm so grateful that doubt doesn't disqualify us. I'm grateful that God doesn't just push us aside because at some places in our life we don't know how to have faith over doubt. It's in the doubt that often great faith emerges. Matter of fact, I believe this is absolutely true, that former doubt can lead to great faith. Former doubt, previous doubt can lead to great faith. Hey, how many Buckeye fans are here? How many of you are Buckeye football fans? All right, the rest of you, we want you to know we love you because so does Jesus. Do you all remember in 2014 when Braxton Miller was the front runner for the Heisman Trophy and somewhere in practice he threw a little outrun and his labrum, his shoulder subplex, he had another labrum tear and he had to go in for surgery. Do you all remember that? Do you remember how hopeless we felt? And then some backup named J.T. Barrett that only a few of us had ever heard that name. He steps up and you know, he doesn't look horrible against Navy. He did okay, but right, I mean, it's Navy. No offense to all our sailors, we love you. You're really good at defending the oceans. You're terrific in open water. You are oceanic wizards of gratitude that we owe you. But when it comes to football, they did beat Army. I don't know what that says, though. Anyhow, here we are. And I love you, soldiers of all shapes and sizes and services. Yeah, don't help me with this. Bill, you're only making it worse. So we beat Navy. We're feeling good. And then we come up against Virginia Tech. Now, let me just tell you, Virginia Tech, easy, Corey. I'm just going to talk through your shenanigans back there. You know, it's that there's always one in a room, right? So we come up against Virginia Tech, and they were a marginal team. Matter of fact, they didn't have a great rest of the season, and we really got beat. And then how many of us began to have doubts for the rest of the season, right? And then JT and the team, and Tom Herman, who's a wizard in the box of offensive coordination, they march through the season and they look great until we come to the third quarter. I think it was the third quarter against that Michigan team, and JT breaks his ankle, and it's the last game of the season. How many of you thought, man, it was a good run, but it's over, right? How many of you, right? We're in church, people. I know. I mean, there was a collective gasp. All of Columbus is like in dismay. And then this guy that, unless you're from Cleveland, you never heard of, named Cardell Jones, who we called 12 gauge, comes out and decimates Wisconsin. Any Wisconsin Badger fans, we love you too. But it was a 52-0 win, I think. I mean, it was crazy in the Big Ten Championship. And then we beat Alabama. That's when I knew, geez, now see. Yeah, and like 5 of you raised your hand to be Buckeye fans, yeah. That's how I knew God was still smiling on the Buckeye State. And then I and like 20 other people from the church are in the northern mountains of Chisec in Guatemala, and by some beautiful miracle of God's sovereignty, we're able through satellite to get the game. It's like the heavens open. Oh, and it's just great. And now it was all in Spanish. Good thing I'm very fluent. when I order at Taco Bell. And we get to that place where we beat Oregon handedly. But all through the season, you know what? I don't like Oregon for this reason. Their mascot is the Ducks. And I think ducks are somehow related to the Canadian geese. And we beat them, and at the end of the season, we're like, man, what a roller coaster. We had so many doubts, but after that game against Oregon where we won 42-20, I thought we could beat a lot of NFL teams the way they played. But I'm a Browns fan, so that should tell you something. I don't know if that's just faith or reality, but either way, we Browns fans have low expectations and a lot of scar tissue. That's how that works. Doubt, man, it's a part of life, and it may seem simple and it may seem small when it comes to, our sports teams in the athletic arena, but how many of you have ever doubted that God could move in a particular way, and you had a lot of doubts on the front side, and then you watch God do something incredible that you couldn't even understand how he would do it, and he does it, and you're going, that's truly amazing. How many of you have ever prayed for somebody and truly you're praying, doubting that even God's grace can change that heart? Anybody? I'm pretty sure my mom had moments like that when she prayed for me. I had a lot of moments like that when I prayed for my dad's salvation. And then my dad came to know Jesus and, man, started to see a transformation in his life. It was gorgeous. I think great doubt can lead to great faith. Former doubt can lead to great faith. Some of the strongest marriages I know truly are comprised of two former doubters in the marriage itself. Isn't it? It's really interesting because, see, doubt does something to us. Doubt moves us in a way that we don't stay neutral, right? And like in marriage, when you're finding yourself in those places where life is hard and relationships strained, your roots are either going to go deep or you're going to topple. And when you're living in those doubt moments and you choose to lean in and you choose to go deep like a big oak tree looking for nutrients, you're driving down in a way that's stable, right? Some of the strongest marriages I know had a lot of doubt from the time they said I do until the place they are today. If you brought your Bible, turn to the book of Luke. We're going to jump in at chapter 24. I love how the Bible, I'm so grateful that they don't white out the human side of the narrative. I'm so grateful that the Bible doesn't just focus on all of God's divinity and take away all of the humanity in the process of understanding a relationship, right? It gives guys like me hope. And we get into chapter 24 of the book of Luke, and verse 36, while they were still talking about this, now what they're talking about is Jesus had already been raised from the dead, and he already talked to Mary and the ladies, and he sent them back to the disciples, and he had already appeared to the two travelers back on their way to Emmaus from having watched the crucifixion, and they're on their way back home on Sunday because they wouldn't travel that far on Saturday, which was a Sabbath, and they're going, man, this is so bad, and they're glum, and Jesus shows up, and he's disguised. They don't recognize him, and Jesus reveals who he is, and they see it, and he says, now go tell the disciples. Go back and let them know. So they go back, and they're telling the disciples, and that's where we pick up. While they were still talking about this, Jesus himself stood among them and said to them, peace be with you. They were startled and frightened. I love this part. Jesus is like pranking them in the moment, right? Right? They're all standing around going, you're kidding me. Are you guys sure it was Jesus? And they're like, here's how I picture it. It's like this holy huddle, and they're all leaning in going, wait a minute. And then all of a sudden, Jesus appears and says, peace be with you. What? I mean, they're terrified. They're startled. I have this game in the office that freaks most people out. I try to get as close to them without them knowing it from time to time. I thought I was going to get punched this week by Pam Wilson. She leads our joy group. I'm like, she's talking, and I'm like this far from her, and she turns around and screams. That's how I see this playing out. You guys don't do that? It's just us ADD kids. Anyway, we come to this place where Jesus shows up. I'm so glad he still shows up. I'm glad that it didn't end with him being laid in a tomb. And he shows up, and they're having this conversation about Jesus, and Jesus speaks peace to them. They're startled and frightened, thinking they saw a ghost. I love that part. Yeah, okay. He said to them, "Why are you troubled? Why do doubts rise in your minds?" Well, why they're troubled is because they probably all have to go to the bathroom now. Right? They're scared. This is like, what do you mean, why are we troubled? Dude, you've got to quit doing that. No? I'm not being irreverent. I'm just reading this as it's truly written. I think Jesus valued laughter. I think Jesus valued relationship. I think Jesus valued understanding where they were and what they needed, just like he understands where you are and what you need. And they're filled with doubts, and they're filled with fear. They're in the upper room, locked away, hidden from all the Jewish people because they're afraid of the religious elite who just killed Jesus. And Jesus shows up in a way that none of them could predict. And he's doing life with them because they become intimately close. Why do doubts rise in your minds? Look at my hands and feet. It's me. Touch me. See? A ghost doesn't have flesh and bones, as you can clearly see that I have. The next line I think is great. When he said this, showed him his hands and feet. While they still didn't believe, because of joy and amazement, they're like, wait a minute, this is too freaky. Right? They're overwhelmed in the moment. I think when Jesus shows up, it's often overwhelming. We just sang that song, when you speak, when you move, when you do what only you can do. Only Jesus can show up like that. Right? It's overwhelming. If you've never experienced the overwhelming nature of Jesus showing up in the middle of your chaos and confusion, I soon hope you do, because it turns doubt to faith. While they're still in bewilderment, he says, while you guys are still trying to figure this out, I love this line. Do you have anything to eat here? What's in the fridge? Anything? Leftovers? They obviously didn't plan ahead. They gave him a piece of broiled fish. Ugh. And he took it and ate it in their presence. So here's how I see it. Jesus is like, so tell me, how's everything? As he's nibbling on Captain D's or Long John Silver's. No? Right on. He said to them, "This is what I told you while I was still with you." Remember, guys, I know it's a lot to comprehend. I know it's a lot to take in. This is what I told you. This is what I tried to explain in the upper room. This is what I was trying to help you understand when I prayed and then broke the bread and we ate it, and then I prayed and said, this wine, this is a new covenant in my blood, and I gave it to you and said, let's not forget these moments. This is what I was trying to help you understand. This is what everything was leading up to. And he said, this is what I told you while I was still with you. Everything. Would you say the word everything? Everything must be fulfilled that is written about me in the law of Moses, the prophets, and the Psalms. Everything must be fulfilled. I don't have time to dive into it. I wish I did. But the sum total number of prophecies fulfilled by Jesus is a statistical anomaly, nearly impossible for one man to fulfill all the prophecies that were predicted about the Messiah to come and how they were fulfilled in detailed order. 100%. Everything must be fulfilled. I think those moments are terrific because we get to see the doubt in the humanity of the disciples. And I mean, check it out. These guys had a front row seat to Jesus. They had a front row seat for 3.5 years of Jesus doing incredible things over and over again. How is it possible that they didn't catch on that these things would have to happen? How is it possible that these guys weren't able to comprehend that Jesus was the Messiah, that he would come back just like he said? How could they have doubt? See, I think we all have Saturdays in our life. Friday, the crucifixion. Saturday, silence. Sunday, resurrection. So often, I think our doubts try to get us stuck in the Saturday. So often, the doubt is more about keeping us stuck in the Saturday than helping us move forward to the Sunday. Right? I don't know what your Saturday doubts have looked like, but I've had plenty of my own. I've had lots of Saturdays that became week-long, month-long seasons of Saturdays. Because, see, Saturdays, doubts, often... How many of you have ever felt guilty when it comes to having doubts about God? Anybody ever felt guilty? You know what, Jesus... I think it's really important to realize Jesus wasn't chastising them. Jesus wasn't beating them up. Jesus wasn't going, aha, you're disqualified. None of that happened. He's still walking with them and helping them. And here's why. I want to encourage you, don't have guilt because of your doubt. I firmly believe guilt is a tool of the enemy to keep us stuck. Conviction is a tool of the Spirit to move us forward, right? And there's a fine line between guilt and conviction, and the guilt that keeps us stuck makes us want to camp out in the Saturday, to the place where we begin to believe that there is no Sunday, right? So Jesus will show up in abnormal ways on our Saturdays, and it will freak us out at times, right? It'll be weird. Peace be with you. I think he smiles. I think he's like, watch, hey, this is going to be good. It's for their benefit. Anyway, turn with me to the book of John. I love how John catches up with this part of the narrative, the 20th chapter. So again, Jesus has already resurrected, and there's one disciple who gets a really bad rap for the name doubt. Matter of fact, forever his name has been associated with the word doubt, right? I mean, 20 centuries later, we're still calling him. It's like we changed his name to doubting first. So it's not Thomas now, it's doubting. And Thomas became his middle name or something, right? Have you ever been accused of being a doubting Thomas, right? I mean, we use it in this weird way. And so Jesus appears to the disciples, but Thomas wasn't there when he appeared the first time and had the Long John Silver's and the peace be with you moment of hilarity. Thomas isn't there. And the rest of the disciples, this is where we catch the narrative taking off. Verse 24. Now Thomas, one of the 12, was not with the disciples when Jesus came, so the other disciples told him, "We've seen the Lord." But he said to them, now Thomas is about to write a huge check with his doubt. He's about to write a huge check with his mouth because of his doubt. I bet some of us have done similar things, right? But he said to them, unless I see the nail marks in his hands and put my finger where the nails were and put my hands into his side, I will not believe. He's making a vow of disbelief. Isn't that incredible? Here's what I know. The vows you make in your pain and the vows you make in your doubt are far stronger normally than the ones you make in your prosperity. A vow made in pain sounds a lot like this: I will never. Right? You're making a firm check. I will never do that again, or I will never be in that situation, or I will never let somebody hurt me, right? Does that make sense? Anyway, Thomas is making a vow. I don't have time to explain much of that, but It's real. Unless I put my finger, which is gross, by the way. I mean, we get a little insight into Thomas here. Not only is he doubting, he's like into weird biology. Anyhow, I really am not trying to take huge liberty. I'm trying to help you see the narrative as it unfolds. I would never in any way try to disrespect the Word of God, but I want you to engage it in a way that it's applicable and transformational for you. And we often think that God, we read it like this. Now Thomas, one of the 12, was not with the disciples when Jesus came. So the other disciples told him, "We've seen the Lord." But he said to them, "Unless I see the nail marks in his hands and put my finger where the nails were and put my hand in his side, I will not believe it." I mean, do you see what is happening? You've got to insert yourself into the moment to understand how it's really unfolding. He's talking through his pain. He's writing huge checks with his mouth that Jesus is going to have to cash with his life. A week later, his disciples were in the house again, and Thomas was with them. Though the doors were locked, I love this part. Though the doors were locked, Jesus came and stood among them and said, "Peace be with you." Right? He doesn't even knock on the door. You can't tell me that he's not trying to catch him off guard. You can't make me believe it. He's trying to show up in a way that they're like, again, will you stop it with a "peace be with you"? No? Okay, sorry. I feel like I'm being judged harshly. I'll just read the narrative. Hey, look, I've got one more week up here, and then I'm gone for 2 months. I'm not checking email. Go ahead and send them. We're all good. The doors were locked. Jesus stood among them. "Peace be with you." Then he said to Thomas, I think after the chaos calmed down, I think Jesus looked at Thomas. And I think he, in a very loving way, met his gaze. Thomas. How do you think Thomas was feeling in that moment before Jesus looked at Thomas? I bet Thomas was doing this. Oh, man. I bet he didn't want to meet his eye line. Have you ever felt shame in your life? Have you ever felt disqualified because of your doubts? I bet Thomas felt a lot of that in that moment. I mean, because again, right, he's human. I love that Jesus didn't let him stay in his shame. He said to Thomas, "Hey, put your finger here. Put your hand in my side." And then he says to Thomas, I think we're so tempted to read the words of Jesus through the filter of our own pain and hurt. So when we read this next line, which I think was delivered in a tone of generosity and love, not in condemnation and guilt. And it took me a long time to figure that out, right? It took me a long time to be able to receive love through these kind of words, because I would filter it through my own issues of upbringing, right? And I always would put exclamation points where they didn't belong. Like after stop. Like Jesus is mad. Jesus wasn't mad. Put your finger here, man. If that's what it takes for you to believe, put your finger here. You want to see where the piercing happened? Where the spear went between the ribs and pierced my... Anyway, where the blood and water flowed in the pericardium. You want to see that, Thomas? I want you to see whatever it is you need to see to believe. Because, see, we did life together, Thomas. All the things you watched, all the experiences we had, they weren't fake, Thomas. And it's not fake now. Everything had to happen. Everything had to take place, Thomas. Stop doubting. Believe. Stop doubting and believe. Trade your doubt for faith. Trade your fear for hope. Trade your hurt for healing. Trade your self-loathing for optimism, because, Thomas, I still love you. Isn't that good? God doesn't abandon us in our doubts. He walks to us in our doubts. That's why his word's true in Matthew 6:33. Seek first the kingdom of heaven. All these things then get added to you. Seek first. I love what he says in Matthew 7. Knock and the door is open. Seek and you find. Ask, it's given. God is really bad at hide and seek on purpose. And when we're in our doubt, we often want to hide. And he's going, look, don't walk away in your doubt. Walk toward me in your doubt. Seek me, I'll be found by you. I want to be near you when you're most troubled and vulnerable. Isn't that good? Man, how many of you have struggled with doubt? Yeah, me too. I bet I've had more doubt than most of you in this room. I bet I've had more doubt than most of you in this room since I've been receiving paychecks from churches. I love this next line. Thomas said to him, "My Lord and my God." Right? He didn't say, "My Lord and my God." No, he shouts it, "My Lord and my God." Because see, when doubt turns to faith, there's this moment where it's like, wow, unbelievable. I can't believe this. This is incredible. I mean, do you get the scene that's happening here? Jesus doesn't knock. Jesus shows up. They freak out again. Thomas has this encounter with Jesus. See, when you have a personal encounter with Jesus, it begins to modify your life in ways you can't even imagine. And here's the crazy, awesome, beautiful thing. Thomas had encounter after encounter after encounter with Jesus. And in our life of faith, it's not a one-time encounter, then we become religious. He didn't die to be our religion. He died to be our Savior. He didn't die to stay dead. He rose to be our Lord. And so Thomas, who watched him make blind people see and deaf people hear and crippled people move, is now going, I'm having another encounter. And he's reclaiming his faith where doubt had taken over. And that gives me great hope when I feel like, man, God, how are you doing this? How are you going to work this out? Because former doubt leads to great faith. The giants of the faith that I know are many of them who struggle with the greatest doubts I would ever see. They've walked through things I hope to never have to walk through. Former doubt can lead to great faith. Former doubt can lead to great faith. So here's what I love about these crazy disciples, man. And this is what I love about Jesus. He just shows up when he knows it's the right time. He doesn't show up early. He doesn't show up late. I know it sounds trite. I know it sounds cliche. He just shows up at the right time. He shows up. He breaks on the scene. He picks the least qualified to carry his message. These guys were all rejected by all the other rabbis. You realize that, right? These aren't the leftovers. These are the castaways. And he keeps showing up. And even in their doubts, he comes back and he puts his arm around them. And he walks with them through their doubt. Man, I've had so many doubts in my life. I mean, I really have. I bet you have too. I've just had a week to think about mine. You know, I remember pretty clearly, Thomas he made a bold statement. Have you ever prayed really specific prayers that if God answers them, you're going to be terrified? Anybody? And then God answers them like you prayed them? You know, here's the problem with praying specific prayers, which, by the way, I encourage you to pray them. Here's the problem with praying specific prayers. When God answers them, then you have to be obedient. I remember pretty clearly when we felt like we were to start a church. And we were feeling and praying and feeling like we were to come to Columbus. We'd never lived here. I'd driven through Columbus. I'd never been to a Buckeye game. I'd watched a lot of them on TV with my grandfather. And I knew 270 was the outer belt, but I couldn't pick out where anything in Columbus was And the only thing I really knew where it was in Columbus, they tore down City Center Mall. And we were feeling like we were to move here. I was a youth pastor in Atlanta at the time. We were a single-income family, 2 little kids. Melissa had been babysitting, and we were snowballing off our revolving debt and my student loans. If you've not taken Financial Breakthrough, I would encourage you to do it. We could not have moved here had it not been for that in our life. And so to go into church planting, there was an assessment center that I knew that I should go to, because church planting it's not an easy thing. The average church plant doesn't exist after 3 years in America. 7 out of 10 church plants don't exist after 5 years. It's hard on marriages, all that stuff. So I kind of knew we should get evaluated by some people that would know, right? Does that make sense? So I prayed a prayer like this. Melissa and I both prayed it, and you should also know I'm a pretty stubborn human being. And I said, God, if this is really your will, now that's a dangerous prayer. If this is really your will, you got to pay for it. I'm not going in debt a penny to be evaluated if this is what you want for us to do. Next morning, I got an email from a gentleman named Larry in New Albany. Hadn't talked to Larry at all about the whole process. Larry's email said, we believe in you. I heard that you're interested in church planting. We'd like to pay all your associated expenses to be evaluated through an assessment center. And the assessment center was in Albuquerque, New Mexico. We lived in Atlanta. I was on the, youth speaking circuit, so I flew quite a bit. You could get direct flights out of Atlanta almost any place. Not to Albuquerque. Here's how you get to Albuquerque. You fly into Denver, and then you get on a crop duster. They fly in low. They kind of boot you out, and they throw your luggage out later. It's not really true, but it felt that way. After we went to the assessment center and took all the personality surveys, and they go through your finances, and you go through marriage assessment, all those things, that we were assessed favorably, my next prayer was, okay, God, if this is really you. Sounds a lot like Thomas. I remember I was sitting on the back of my Blazer by a little waterfall on the back of the property at the church that I was a part of in Atlanta, that I was on staff at. My job there was to be the youth pastor and also to oversee the development of the 40-acre site into the new complex. And on the back side of the site that had formerly been a horse farm, I would take my truck back there and I would sit, because there was that little waterfall, and I'd journal back there. And I remember in my journal saying, God, if this is really you, you have to sell our house, and we're not going to use a realtor. I've since learned the error of my ways. To all realtors in the room, thank you very much. I now use realtors. But again, I didn't want to, we didn't have a lot of margin financially, right? And so Melissa said, okay, we prayed that prayer for like a week, and then she was gone with the kids somewhere. All right, our kids were little kids at the time. And I got our for sale sign out of the garage, and that we used to sell our house in Kentucky before we moved from Atlanta, and I got a big fat Sharpie I found in the house, and I just wrote the new number over the old number. Frugal, not cheap. And I stuck it in the yard, and I'm cutting the grass, and I mean, our house was on a hill, so you had to be either a billy goat or short-legged on one side to really like it, because you couldn't, I mean, it was a lot. And I'm cutting the grass. Melissa came home. She's like, what are you doing? I'm like, well, I'm cutting the yard. She's like, why that sign? Can we not at least buy a new for sale by owner sign? And I said, yeah, that's fine, whatever. And I finished cutting the grass, and she had me start the barbecue, and so I'm grilling, and the phone rings that same night. And it's a realtor, and I said, now look, we're not signing a contract with a realtor. And she said, that's okay, but I have a buyer in my car. Can we look? I'm like, come on in. And Melissa's like, what? Right, frantic. Everything gets pushed under beds. Everything is being hidden. Camouflage takes place, right? Because she's panicking. I'm like, they're not here to see our stuff. They're here to look at the house. Anyway, I learned a lot about how to think like a woman. I don't always use those skills, but I've learned a lot over the years. Hey, can we just have an agreement that you guys won't tell Melissa any of this? Good. So they made an offer, and I turned it down, and we went on vacation like 5 days later, and they called. And you should know, on our street, there were 10 or 11 houses professionally marketed on our street. Our street was like just under 3/4 of a mile long. There were 2 streets into the subdivision and 2 cross streets. Not a huge subdivision, right? They bought the house with a for sale sign that was written over by a fatter Sharpie. That tells me a lot about marketing in the MLS. However, turns out they bought the house. We had to rent it back for a month at our price. Crazy how those things happen. See, when I tell you things like form or doubt can lead to great faith, I'm not just making up some pastoral mumbo jumbo. I'm telling you, I walk this relationship out like you do. I've not done it perfectly. If it's a dance, I've stepped on all kinds of feet. Right? I'm not an expert in it. I'm just purposed through it. We moved to Columbus, and I'll tell you, it was hard on our marriage. We started seeing a marriage counselor before the church got launched because things were tight. I was stupid. Truly. I didn't want to sign a long-term lease, so we lived in Mount Vernon in professors' housing at the campus. And I drove 5 days a week, and then on Sunday as a family to Columbus. I had an office on the south side of the city at Grove City Nazarene Church. And Melissa, all her friends were in Atlanta. I mean, we went from Atlanta, a city of 4.5 million people at the time, who ironically don't know how to keep their highways up, to Mount Vernon, where the Walmart has a hitching post for horses. Right? Our son started kindergarten. I didn't understand how big that is for a mom. I didn't understand the emotional need for her to feel settled. I was just being a financially restrained idiot, truly. So we started seeing our marriage counselor, who, by the way, if making time to get healthy in your marriage is it manly, then I guess I'm just not manly. I'm good with that. Because if your marriage is worth having, it's worth investing in. And if you don't want to get, if you don't go to see a doctor once in a while for an annual physical, don't tell me how you, right? It's kind of like studying for a C but praying for an A. I've got a kid in college. We have these talks. Right? We invest in our marriage because it's worth it, and you should too. So if you need help, get it. So our marriage counselor, Teresa, now she's just a family friend, and we still see her. We go to tune-ups. If it's a hard struggle for you to have a pastor who has a marriage counselor that they go and see, then you probably need to look for a different church, because I don't plan on stopping. And that's not me trying to be hard. Marriage is tough. It's worth it. It's God's idea. He put us together. Anyway, fast forward, and the band should come up, or I'll just keep talking. Let me take you down this weird story of how former doubt leads to great faith. So we're here, and I've got an AMC theater contract for Sawmill on my desk, the AMC in Dublin. And this is back when it was still sketchy, before they put in those Barca loungers that it doesn't matter what's on the... It could be Die Hard and I'm falling asleep, right? Those things are too comfortable. I need like the $1.50 seat. We're struggling trying to get this church launched, and a friend of mine, I've got the contract on my desk at home, and he said, hey, Brad, there's a church not too far from where you work, because I was working at Starbucks with Liz at the time. And he said, there's a church on Dublin Road, and their pastor quit, and they need somebody to fill the pulpit. Are you interested? And I said, 1, can I tell them why we moved here? 2, is it a paying gig? Truly, because we were struggling. When you don't know where the money to pay the electric bill or the gas bill is going to come from, you pray different. One of the reasons our prayer lives in America are so anemic is because we're not desperate. Anyway, back to this. When I say stuff like that, that's why I'm always shocked you guys come back. So we're praying, and I get this call, and they said, yeah, I think they'll pay you. And I show up, I'm in jeans and a button-down shirt. I had a blazer on, and I think I was probably wearing Chuck Taylors at the time. Maybe not, but I've had a long-lasting love for Converse. And you know, the people were so loving, but it was an older congregation, and they just sort of lost their way on how to be relevant. And before I went up to speak, Melissa put her, and they had these purplish, crimson-looking chairs. They were in the old church. That's why we brought them over. There's some things like the altars. We didn't make new ones on purpose. Melissa put her hand on my knee, and she leaned over, and she said, if they ask you to preach again, don't say yes right away. She didn't have much faith. Talk about doubts. So, turns out they give us this building. The Harnack Center, the original building. They gave us the building and the property. About 30 people. Judy, you were part of that. Jeff, you were part of that. I'm sure there are others. How many people were here the first Sunday that I ever preached in the other? Would you raise your hands? Mert? Yeah, so look around. Owen and Joyce, John in the back, Judy and Jeff. How about that? It's been a fun ride. With a lot of doubts, hasn't it? Oh, man. I remember pretty clearly the day that I was in the old farmhouse where we had the offices. I was in the basement going through old files and financial records and figuring out what by law should we keep and what should we have shredded. And I came across a stack in a box of 3-ring binders, and it was an old church pictorial directory. Y'all, did you guys ever have that done where Olin Mills would come to the church and, you know, your dad's trying to make you look like you're supposed to be there, and anyway, all that. And I'm flipping through it. Now, let me put a pin there and come back. When I was in Ironton, I got a phone call from a church in Columbus asking me if I'd be interested in coming up and talking about being their youth pastor. The way that they became aware of me was through a mutual friend named Mike Hackney. Mike Hackney was a carpet rep for the floor covering store I worked at with my father-in-law and my mother-in-law, the store they owned. They matter of fact, provided all the floor covering for the church at cost. We only paid cost to them. So Mike Hackney had said, hey, I know you're about to finish school and you're going to go into youth ministry. We need a youth pastor at this church in Columbus. Is it okay if I give your name? Well, he gave my name to this church, and they called, and man, it sounded pretty good because I was ready to get out of River City, not because I don't like the tri-state. I love that area, actually, but because I wasn't mature enough in my own walk of life to know how to do relationship well with my extended family that I just married into, in full disclosure. And I felt like I was, man, let's get out of here, Melissa. As soon as I graduate, let's just go. And she's like, whatever, I don't get it. But and God woke me up one night. God woke me up, and this is what kept going over my mind. Jeremiah, and it's as real to me as if God were sitting here saying, read Jeremiah 29. And you know what I did? I argued with God. I said, I know that one. And I quote Jeremiah 29:11. Now, I had only been a believer for like 4 years, so I hadn't even read through the Bible yet, right? And I quote it, like, get this, I'm quoting God the Bible, right? I'm doubting the whole thing. Here's what you should know. If you're here and you're looking for a church, I just want to get it all out there. I believe God still moves. I believe in signs and wonders. I don't believe it's all prescripted, and I don't pretend to understand everything God's always doing. But I'm telling you, I quote Jeremiah 29:11, which says, "For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you, not to harm you, plans to give you a hope and a future." And God said, read the chapter. What I didn't realize at the time is that Jeremiah this portion of his writing was during the Babylonian captivity, when all the Israelites have been carried from Jerusalem to Babylon. They're under Nebuchadnezzar's rule. And it starts out, this is how chapter 29 starts out. "Remain in your captivity, be fruitful and multiply." Right? I'm like, no! This isn't how I want it. So I took a position in Ironton, right across the river from Ashland where we lived, and we were in ministry there for 6 years, and it was great. Some of the best years of my entire life of ministry were there. Fast forward, take the pen out. I'm in this farmhouse, and I'm going through the pictorial directory, and there's Mert's picture and other people I know, and I get to the H's, and I see this picture, and it's Mike Hackney. And there's a phone number. So I run upstairs as fast as my little legs would carry me, and I'm punching it in, and I'm thinking, man, please answer. Please don't let it be do. I'm sorry, the number you've dialed has been disconnected, whatever. And it's not. And this guy answers, and I said, "Hi, is this Mike?" "Yes, who's this?" I said, "You're never going to remember me. That's not the way to start a phone call." I said, I gave him my name, and he remembered me right away. And I said, "Mike, I've got one really clear question, man. What was the name of the church? Do you remember when you were going to this place and you had him call me? What was the pastor's name and what was the name of the church?" And he said, "David Van Hoos, and the church was Northwest Evangelical Christian Church." You know, that's the name of the church the Harnack Center building was Northwest Evangelical Christian Church. Now, what are the odds? Because you know how many churches are in Columbus, Ohio? You know how many, do you get that? I don't know if it is. Like for me, it was like that "peace be with you" moment. Like I'm in the basement, it's, what? What are you doing? Right? I couldn't even comprehend how God worked this thing together. It doesn't make sense to me. And let me just tell you, if God can use me, you're qualified. You're very qualified. Because He's not after perfect people. He's after surrendered people who want to live with purpose. And I have doubts like you have doubts. I'm going on a sabbatical because I had doubts that God wanted me to stay in ministry because I'm tired. I'm going to come back with more energy. And we're going to go further, faster, and we're going to make a dent in this city for the kingdom of God, and we're going to extend eternity, and we're going to help people find hope. And I'm going to need you to help us do it. Right? But listen, church, if you have doubt, you're in good company. God's not mad. He just wants to show up. Seek Him in your doubt. Don't walk from Him. Seek Him in your doubt. Pray like you need Him to show up in your doubt. I don't know where it is. If it's in your finances, pray and trust God to show up in your doubt. Honor Him and He shows up. I don't get it, but I'm telling you, peace be still. Maybe your marriage. Maybe you need Him to show up in your marriage. He will. You pray like it matters, He'll show up. You love like it counts, He'll show up. Maybe your kids, maybe it's something with your kids. Man, I could tell you story after story. I'll try to quit boring you. I'm just telling you, God still shows up. He still shows up and the room's packed and you're going, man, if only God would show up. And then all of a sudden, Shazam, there He is. Peace be still. What? You're here. And things change because He still moves and He still arrives and God still loves. And He's not somewhere way out in the distance. I don't believe Bette Midler had it right back in the early 90s, I guess. From a distance, He's watching us. No, He's with us, right? It's the God of presence. He's our Jehovah who's present in the moment, and you can trust Him with it. And I don't know where you are, but if it feels like you're on one side of the Grand Canyon and He's on the other side, don't forget, He still is the bridge builder, way maker, God who shows up.